Hi everyone, my name is Andy Evansen. Are you ready to explore the fascinating world of watercolor? In this lesson, we're getting awfully close to the most interesting part, so I recommend you just sit tight and pay attention closely for the next half hour.
All right, so I'm just going to start up here with this little shape up above. Want to see some of the little gaps of sky showing through there. Hopefully you can kind of see a little bit how much water and paint that I have on here. Okay, so I've got the top of that church steeple on, and now I'm going to mix the brown for the rest of the steeple, and I'm just going to touch that bead like I was talking about, connecting shapes. And I'm going to start connecting that big church steeple down, like so. Even a little highlight or two once in a while for maybe a window or something. But that's a much stronger middle value that I'm going to need for that particular backlit shape than what I was able to put on before. I'm going to continue on here. I just put a little bit of lavender in this. And I want to make sure I've already got some of those the larger tree branches and things in here with that initial block in. I wanted to leave a little bit of sunlight shining through up here. I'm going to kind of lighten that up, keep some warmth up in that area.
Perfect.
All right. Continue down. I'm just going to add a little bit more of those fall colors in here.
We have a question if you have pre-wetted the paper, if this is
Nope.
wet on wet or if this is wet on dry.
No, this is wet on dry. If I pre-wet my paper, that the shape of that church steeple is just going to fuzz everywhere, right? So I'm working on dry paper now.
Is it cold pressed or rough or something else?
This is Saunders rough, which is basically kind of the same as cold press texture of other types of paper. Saunders is a very soft paper, so the regular cold press doesn't have as much texture as I usually like. So I actually use Saunders rough.
Okay, so you would get a bit similar results on a cold pressed Arches or the Kilimanjaro.
Yes, yes, for sure. Yep.
Perfect, exactly. Thank you.
Just painting around a couple of windows with that big shape there. Don't want to make them too perfect. I'm going to have tree trunks kind of passing through them also later to break up some of those shapes. But all right, now I'm getting pretty close to where I'm going to have to start painting around my figures with all of this. I really want the light to kind of pop out on those figures. So I'm going a little bit stronger still with my middle value here. And the colors I'm using are just a variety of, got some neutral tint, I've got some lavender, I've got some raw sienna and burnt sienna to warm it up in some spots. So I need to paint around this little figure here now. And maybe kind of connect her with the middle value shadow up on her hood. Paint around that light sleeve there, the shadow on the other part of that sleeve. Need to paint around the nice bright white hair of this other lady. But her jacket and everything she's wearing is pretty much darker than the background, so I'm going to paint right through that. Right, and then here's the sidewalk, right about there. We've got some more grass.
So in addition to actually painting, I love teaching painting. I started during the pandemic teaching online courses, and it allowed me to reach a much wider audience, which was very exciting for me. being able to share my knowledge with a wider group of people. And it's also more convenient for the students as well. They don't have all the travel expenses. You can just stay in your own home and study right there on your computer. So if you haven't studied with me yet, or if you feel like you want to continue learning, I'm sharing my favorite free workshop with you now. So you can sign up via the link on this video and get a taste for how I teach. And hopefully you find it interesting enough to continue on.
Showing through, change it to a very pale green for the grass, which is also middle value. All right, now this lady's legs are darker than the grass, so I can paint right through them. Good that you can see some of these little passages that I'm doing. Like I said, a lot of times you're seeing the start of a painting, but not the end of it. All right, I wanted to preserve that little shaft of light coming through across the way there, so I'm going to save some of that previous pale green. The sidewalk was a little bit brighter there. Right, so I've got that little bit of green showing through, shadows, and that's going to connect right up to my car and up to that little fence over here. Got a slightly darker tree right here that I want to try and pop in a little bit while everything's still damp.
Then you can press between like just next to the microphone, you can press and type audio settings or choose audio settings. Here we can change the volume so that instead of automatically adjust microphone volume, you can instead adjust it so that it is at the highest level. Because this will make it will make the sound better. After that, in some place further down, there is something called suppress background noise. If you can't find it, I hope you can find it. This is usually set on auto or middle or something like that. We want it on low because when we suppress that background noise very little, then we will also hear the more subtle sounds. So when you have done that, you can return the computer to Andy and we will hopefully hear him even as he is mixing the colors. And everyone, this is how it goes when we are live. So you get to take part of how it actually is for us.
Something can go wrong, it will.
It is like behind the scenes and in front of the scene at the same time.
Exactly.
So I've switched it from auto on the noise suppression to low.
Wonderful. We will probably hear much better now. Thank you so much, Laura. We're so happy to have you here supporting us.
Yeah, I wouldn't, even with your instructions, I wouldn't have been able to tackle that one.
And you are welcome, Andy, to speak a little bit more loudly than you would otherwise, if it's possible. But otherwise, we will hear enough. Thank you. Bye. I'm here.
Thank you.
I also directed it more towards you.
Gotcha. All right, so I'm adding some of the tree trunks and things into this shape right now also so that they merge a little bit better into that background shape. In these shadowy areas, it's kind of nice if more of your forms will kind of blend together a bit more. All right. Just a lot of little dark shapes in there. Again, following my value study plan, I'm painting all this area over here that I couldn't really do before. It's okay if the trees fuzzed a little bit while my sky was still damp, but I didn't want this building shape to fuzz too much, so I had to wait for my sky to dry a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to slightly darken the side of that white building there too and let that join with everything. Out here, I want that to read more as a middle value because again, this has to kind of pop out the light on the top of that car. So if I could go just slightly darker with that, that helps. that little sign right here. Scratch that out. Okay, now I want to join that right down into my car also. Back end of it, simplify that a little bit. I'm just going to try and paint leave the little highlights on there and fill in the rest of the back end of it.
Someone is asking about the size of the paper.
Yeah, it's a half sheet. So,
Half sheet. Thanks.
yeah, what is that? 38 by 56 centimeters, whatever. I'm going to use a fairly large brush here. And again, I think you can see now I've got that nice kind of shaft of light coming through over to that area. This is more of a kind of a bigger shadow area being cast by the building by these ladies. Paint through their legs again. Wanted them to cast a little bit of a shadow too, so they're standing in just a little patch of sunlight here that I'm going to try and leave behind where their feet are. Trying to paint around this step ladder right next to me too. It's not easy. So I'm managing the hard edges because my paper is dry right now, so I can get that nice crisp edge of my shadow shape up here. That's why I had to wait for my paper to dry before I put this in. So if I'm working on dry paper, I should be able to get some nice crisp edges with these big shapes. All right, and there's a difference where I want my lost edges and my found edges. Lost edges are where I'm kind of going to touch a shape that's still a little bit damp that I just painted, so it fuzzed like I did in here. I wanted some lost edges there. But where that shape is touching dry paper, it's a nice, crisp, hard edge. Just going to try and lighten that little patch here slightly if I can. Okay, so I've got that nice big raking shadow. Now there's a couple of smaller shadows up here going across the road, some other buildings, things like that. Put those in. I went right over to this little patch of grass by the parking lot. So I'm going to put some of that in. Where the little fire hydrant is. So that should fuzz a little bit because I'm putting it in while everything else is still wet. And some of those nice little lost edges. All right, before everything dries too much, I'm going to switch to a little smaller brush and try and put in some of the dark details on the bottom of that car so that they fuzz a little bit too, the tires and the little shadow underneath it. Nice and contrasty there. So I did want that shadow underneath the car to fuzz a little bit. That's why I'm putting it in now. And I've got that darker rooftop over that white building that I can put on here. I waited just a little bit for that because I didn't want it to fuzz down too much into the light part of that building there. I wanted to save a little bit of a highlight. I can merge that now with that darker tree area. And we're going to have some more branches and things there later anyways. But just getting these nice contrasty bits on my painting now to help pop the light. That's what I'm looking for. And I can even drop in a window here. Another little porch or a window down below, little shapes like that. There's a sign out front of that building that's more in middle value I can put in here. And again, that's going to help pop the light on my car a little bit. So when it comes time to putting the details in my paintings, I don't want to outline things, okay? So I'm not just drawing a dark line around my car to get it back. If I want a brighter, I'm painting a darker shape next to it. Always try and paint shapes, not lines, if you can. There's a difference. All right, so I've got the big connected shadow shape going across the ground plane now. Kind of knocked in the big shape of the church and the building next to the church and all that. I'm going to work my way across just a little bit into this background area. Put a few little darks back here also, not too much, because this is back in the distance. So
I'm going to try and give you your top camera back.
Okay, so I was just starting to put some little darks back here. Gonna help pop that road out also, show a little bit more detail. But again, that's way back in the distance, all right? I don't want it to be too obvious. Little dark shapes there. All right, I'm gonna darken up. We'll jump over now to the other side of the painting. Start darkening up areas around the star of my show. So when I chose this to paint, or why I chose this reference photograph, and I alluded to this earlier, when you're dealing with the landscape, obviously, you're going to have multiple elements of the landscape that go into some of these scenes, right? But there should still be something, an area of interest that attracted my attention a bit more. And I just loved the strong light on this house and the shaft of light coming through, hitting these warm buildings over here. Okay, the shape of the church steeple is important, but it's all in that shadow area, and it's kind of merging with the trees and everything else over here. And the figures will be a little bit, worked on with some darks, but I didn't want them to overtake it either. It's mostly about this little area here, the shaft of light, like I said, leaning the viewer's eye over here, getting that contrast, a nice warm color over there with the trees. So now I'm going to start developing that just a little bit here. I want that to kind of fuzz into those trees a bit, so I'm just going to use my finger to smudge that a little bit. Okay, so we have that. I can go a little bit darker with some of the tree foliage, but I'm going to darken up the area of the house behind it slightly. And this is going to be so I can pop the light on that tree just a little bit better by darkening up at least up at the top of the roof line of this house. Obviously, I already had some middle value there, but I want to pop the light on that tree, so I'm just darkening up a little bit around it. Tricky stuff. And we've got our little picket fence. It was important that I not leave that fence white paper, okay? Your brain is telling you that this is a white house and the little picket fence is a white fence, but it was all in that shadow plane facing me. So it all needed to be much more of a middle value in order to pop, again, the sunlight on the right side of that house more. There's a dark little evergreen tree right here also that I can use to show the shape of the house, or the fence behind it, sorry. And darkening that up a little bit. So that little dark evergreen tree will help to pop the sunlight also. Okay, now those two little warm buildings have a shadow side also that I haven't darkened up yet. All you're seeing right now is the bright sunlit side of it. I'm going to darken that area up a little, or a lot. I want it to really pop the light there again. So that contrast that I'm going to go for to try and show that it's going to help to pop the light on the white house and the light on the little brown houses next to it. So right down to that little shrub in front there. So I need to break this up just a little bit as that comes down. And another little shape here. The building was kind of split into two. All right, and then a couple of windows. Just little flicks of dry brush for windows and doors. I don't want to get too carried away with that. I can pop the light on the front of that little house a bit better. And the trees over here could probably use a little scumbling of some darker paint also. Just a little bit. I'm kind of dry brushing in some of the shadows here with a smaller synthetic brush, going a little bit darker with that. Trying to leave some of those highlighted areas out. So a little thicker paint now, synthetic brush. It's important that I use a synthetic brush to do this dry brush because synthetic brushes don't hold as much water. I'm not going to accidentally paint a real big solid shape on here if I stick to a synthetic brush. All right, so I've got that nice dark area. Scumbled in, still middle value. It's not really a dark yet. Another big dark shrub over behind the cars there on the left that I can put in. And again, that's going to help to pop the light. No, I'm just suggesting cars with little tires and things back there. I don't want to get too carried away with that stuff either. For obvious reasons, I don't want to suck the viewer's eye over to a parking lot, but they're important little shapes on their own right, and that they're just kind of suggesting to the viewer a little bit of detail. Even if I'm not painting a lot of detail, I'm trying to keep it nice and simple. And hopefully they see, some of these little shapes, they'll just figure out that there's cars over here. If I zoom in on them, they're not really painted very well. I don't need to. It's amazing what you can get away with when you're painting some of these darker shapes, and the viewer will just see cars out of this stuff. Okay, so I've got a little parking lot over there now. I've got the light kind of established on that road side. I've got the vehicle on the other side of the street. I'm going to darken up the back side of that vehicle just a little bit because I don't like how the dark bottom of it is standing out so much. I want to kind of merge that a little bit better. Simplify that down. Okay, a couple of dark pants legs on my figures. And then I've got a little fun bit at the end that I want to talk about. I'm going to have to put on here yet. You might not even, probably haven't even noticed it because you're not seeing the reference photo close up. All right, dark legs. Okay, so these fun little details to finish it off. The figures walking. As I said, that other lady is mostly a dark outfit, so I painted everything right through her. Okay, I painted around her white hair and her head, but everything else is just joined and painted through. Now I'm painting my darker shape right on top of all that other stuff, and I can get her back. Don't paint around shapes that are darker. Paint right through them. Go a little bit darker with her jeans and her pants. And I want to make it look like she's walking also, so one leg back a little bit, blurred some. And she's stepping right off of that curb where there was some grass. I could put that in there too. So again, you saw it at a very kind of a 60% finished stage, that big middle value connected shape, and that's a very important shape, obviously, but there's a lot more to it, that happens in these final details, and they're a lot of fun to put in. But you've got to be careful because it's fun starting to put these things in, and then you just keep putting more and more stuff into your painting just because it was in the reference photograph. So even though I'm putting in details, I'm still kind of squinting at the scene, and I'm making sure that what I'm putting in here, if I can still see it when I squint down at it, I put it in my painting. If I have to look really closely to figure out what something is, it doesn't need to be in my painting, and I can leave it out. Because you've got to, if you want your paintings to look nice and loose, it's really important that you find areas to simplify and just let the viewer figure out for themselves what it is that's happening. The edge of that curve there. All right. So most of the details that I want in here are in here. I'm going to darken up the side of that little fire hydrant, the red fire hydrant. Like so. Give that a light side, shadow side. Leave that little bit of red, darker red there. So I'm not going to be able to completely finish this, obviously. There's a bit too much going on, but you've seen most of what I would do it towards the end of a painting here now. I'm just going to kind of scumble this across here and get some of these little fall trees established, the little twigs at the treetops. Dry brushing, we will cover that in the program as well. All the different types of marks that you need to get a handle on. Sometimes everything is wet and running together and you're working wet into wet. Sometimes for the details at the end, you need to use some dry brush. So all this will be covered in the program. Practice images. Most paintings are going to incorporate all of it. Wet into wet, wet on dry, dry brush. As I was saying before, it's really difficult to get it all working together. Darken up some of those tree trunks back there. I left out that public parking sign. Didn't need that in my painting. That little gap there. The tree trunk for that thing. Let that cast a little shadow. Bit more dry brushing on those trees over here. This one I've painted some of the taller branches and things, but now I need to get the little tops of them up here. Just a feathery touch. I'm barely even touching the paper with this brush here now. And this is why I like to use kind of a cold pressed paper. I like some kind of a texture so I can get some of this dry brush effect, where I'm just basically just putting a little bit of paint lightly on the bumps of the painting, of the paper. Some branches like so. All right, and then I'm going to pop in a couple little squirrel's nests. It's so funny. Maybe maybe it was meant to be. When I was leaving the house this morning, I've never seen this before. I was trying to drive through the neighborhood and get out, and there was literally like 7 squirrels. They kept running. I don't know if they were chasing each other or playing, if they were siblings or what, but they were all over the road. I couldn't even get through. I had to keep pausing for them to get out. They knew I was going to be painting this today. Another little one there. So I've got a bunch of little squirrels' nests in these trees now. Look a little bit more closely at my painting.